Good morning. It is April 30th, 2025, the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. I'm at my home in upstate New York, not too far from where my father grew up. I'm Kat Fitzpatrick. I've been writing for over 12 years about my father's evacuation from Saigon, the time that my family and I lived there, and all about Vietnam. My Stories of Vietnam on Substack, which you may be watching this on, is a way of capturing these, revisiting them, and sharing other people's stories. This morning, 10 years ago, I was on Phu Quoc Island, where I had traveled to in order to follow in my father's footsteps. I went there at the end of April, visited his office, the place that we lived when we lived there in 74, 75, and as well as flew down to Phu Quoc Island, where he had staged an evacuation of nearly 1,000 South Vietnamese, people that he worked with that he could just not bear to leave behind. I had this notebook with me. It's a notebook that he used in college. He didn't write a lot, but this is one of his essays in this book particularly. So it was blank and I took it with me. And on this morning, 10 years ago, I wrote about what happened 50 years ago. I got up at 5:45 a.m. and went and sat on the beach. I sat on this very sarong. This morning I'm using it as a blanket because here in New York it's not quite as warm as in Vietnam. In fact, I'm not outside because it's so windy. It would ruin the sound on this video. But I wanted to revisit and share with you what I wrote. And this was what I wrote on Du Dong Beach on Phu Quoc Island, April 30th, 2015. Hi, Dad. I'm sitting on the beach not too far from where you were 40 years ago, trying to get off the island. The Gulf of Thailand is so calm that it's hard to imagine the chaos Saigon was in for Vietnamese this morning and was for Americans last night. Thank you for all the help you've sent with writing this book, such as it is thus far. I wasn't very far at that point. I feel at once as if I'm flying on the wings of angels and standing in the dark, stumbling in the dark. This morning, I seem to feel exceptionally uninspired. You must have been feeling a lot that way after the night you had on the sand, fearing gunfight at any moment, unsure if your transport was going to be approved. Why do we need to do this? To relive our stories over and over again? How is it that I never get tired of going over this one more time, again and again, as faltering as I often feel in my efforts? There's a thunderstorm right now over Cambodia. Just now, a brilliant flash of light in the dark clouds that defy the dawn's light and beauty, and the deep ensuing drum rolls of thunder. Your colleague Charlie wrote that you were all smiles but looking exhausted when you climbed aboard the Challenger at about 10 a.m. on this day 40 years ago. That line makes me think of you, your enduring good humor all the years of my childhood and young adulthood. You died when I was just 26. I left for college at 18 and married at 20, so we really only had so little time together. So many regrets. You were such a quality person. How could I have filled my life with so much more mistreatment? I sometimes wonder if you ultimately felt that way about the U.S. government. You were so quality and gave so much, and yet in the end, they disowned you in Saigon. But you did not abandon your people, although of course in a way you experienced that also. This life is so complex. Why do I feel like I need to figure it out? To have omniscient understanding so that I may move about and be. Back to the moment. It is April 30th, 2015 at 6:20 a.m. I'm sitting with my feet and calves in the sand. The sun has just now cleared the heavily forested horizon. The ocean, see, it's funny reading cursive. The ocean is flat a pale blue, and in places almost white, and others near the thunderstorm lingering over Cambodia, almost black. Almost all American personnel were out of Saigon, save for a few Marines who would lift off at 7:53 a.m. I don't know what time you lifted from the salty sand, but it was probably just after 9 a.m. Your colleague Gass was closer to 1 p.m. So as you said, the two of you were the very last out of Vietnam. Someday, I will be sitting telling people about this, how I sat on the beach 40, I always choke up sooner or later, 40 years after your heroic effort. How it was a lost evacuation, how over 1,000 lives had a chance for a new future because of you. I keep wanting to affix meaning and keep reminding myself to tell the story, to affix the details and let the story emerge. Just then a puppy ran up, a silly little blue and black bundle of energy. And that is why this voyage, this sojourn, this journey is so important, this one I took to Vietnam 10 years ago. I'm not retracing your footsteps to see exactly what you saw. That's impossible, yes. But to immerse myself into my own experience so that from the two, the details I collect, and I was like, isn't there a better word about the details? The details I collect and the written memories I have from you and Mom and other historians, I can weave a new telling, as near to the factual truth as humanly possible, and with my own sense of things, perhaps bringing the telling alive in a way that extends. Now the dog's barking. Extends near. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Extends near me from fight. A lot of talking. Oh, sorry. There's a lot of barking. The other. Oh, I got really distracted by this dog. There's barking, and there's one bristling and growling there, and proceeds to mark territory. And then I continued on with this, so that hopefully the details emerge from me in a new lively way. The sun just over the horizon is hot already. The water just down the beach is full of laughing groups of Vietnamese. It's their big holiday. Though they are celebrating the end of the war, the reunification, I cannot help but observe that they are on an exorbitant seaside holiday. They must be successful in a way that communism, socialism does not espouse. The country was freed from our presence by a communist tide, but all signs show that it perched to catch the wave of a commercial prosperity. And no wonder. Vietnam and the Vietnamese have a lot to offer the world. The laughter carrying over the water brings to mind the love of life. Would it be bad to use the French joie de vivre? Perhaps not, for they also kept French bread and French doors. The land is beautiful and very varied. The history and their determination to be free begat a sort of right to a new level of life and liberty and prosperity. Hey, that's sort of like me, I wrote. Dad, there's a lot of backstory about me recovering from several incidents that brought me just down to kind of a bare subsistence and rising back up from it. Dad, do all things really ultimately work together for good? Are our stories really endless, always seeking that resolution, that reunification? In the beginning of this notebook, in your notes, you were at Georgetown or Catholic University, and you wrote, every system so far as it contains untruth contains the seeds of its own decay and destruction. I'm going to read that again. This was in the notes in the front of this book. And he wrote, every system as far as it contains untruth contains the seeds of its own decay and destruction. This is why believing or trying to believe an untrue thing causes such pain. The essential being in us knows it is not the truth, and therefore, I always choke up. Okay, and knows it is not the truth, and therefore doomed to pass from our tales as the vanquished foe. So this is why believing or trying to believe an untrue thing causes such pain. The essential being in us knows it is not the truth, and therefore doomed to pass from our tales as the vanquished foe. But oh, the tales, let me tell them. As you said at the end of your letter to Mom, if we make it, this will be a book. If we don't make it, it still will. I'm glad you made it out, Dad. I'm sorry you were not able to write a book about it. Help me, as I know you have been, to write this one now. Help me to use all the details. Me sitting here on the beach, on this island that you left. To help make those moments and meanings come alive. I love you, Dad. Me. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I am honored to do this work. It's not easy work for me sometimes, and yet sometimes it's really joy-filled. I never wanted to write about Vietnam, being that there's so much pain and suffering involved for Americans, for Vietnamese, probably for anybody watching that era when we were there. In my dad's heart, he was fighting the ghost of Stalin. He thought he was doing the right thing, that we needed to stop this evil of communism. And if you know any history about Mao and Stalin, they literally killed over 60 million of their own people. He didn't want that to happen to anyone. Ultimately, the Vietnam era wrought so much harsh pain and suffering. I didn't want to pick that up and write about it. I actually like to write about funny things and nature. But it came upon me almost like a cause or mission. And so I've taken it up the best I can. I've been writing about it, as I said, for 12 years. I thought today, the 30th of April, 2025, was my finish line. I thought that I would be done with all the work. I have a book under my belt. I think I captured everything really the best I could. And I've had a lot of feedback that people enjoyed the work. They liked to take the look at Vietnam from this new perspective. I was 8 years old when I was there. The soldier stories and the politician stories need to be remembered, need to be heard, are profound and meaningful. And yet, like I wrote in this little essay on Phu Quoc Island, it seems Americans, all people, we like to see something from a new perspective. I was always fascinated by how behind the scenes shows are fascinating. Like, why do we want to see how a show was made or hear how an author wrote? So in a way, the stories I'm telling are almost another step removed, almost a behind the scenes, because I was so young. And then my colleague, Karen Kaiser, who's been telling her story of living there as an adult woman near her 30s, that's also another fact, behind the scenes viewpoint, from an adult viewpoint. She wrote Gardens in the Midst of War. I highly recommend it and have featured it many times on my Substack. So here we are, April 30th, 2025, 50 years after the Americans left in disgrace. Almost everybody remembers pictures of people being evacuated off rooftops, helicopters being shoved into the sea in order to make room for more people on aircraft carriers. And just like my dad wrote in the beginning of this notebook, and I reiterated, that when we live with untruth, whatever we're doing, we have not built our house on a solid foundation, and it's going to crumble sooner or later. So there's that. And as I said, I thought that this would be a finish line, but I can also see just from the conversations I've been having this week and working with Karen last week that while I think I'll ease up a little on the intensity of how often I post, I am working on a middle grade novel that I would like to get out for young people to be able to read about this era, that combines a young person's perspective of trying to come to terms with why she lives in a country that's at war, which I did from July 1974 to April 1975 when I was evacuated out with my family. And now at this point, I feel like I cannot give up the joy of connecting with the Vietnam story not because the story is good and powerful, but because the people, the people I've met are good and powerful and have such courage. In fact, right now, my downstairs neighbor is just met him. He was in the Navy and was in Vietnam for a year, and he's like, I don't talk about Vietnam, and yet somehow, because of that connection of knowing that we both have shared something of that story, we just feel a kinship. So, so I'm not really going anywhere. I'm celebrating, not celebrating. It's really not a celebration, again, except that it's a celebration of the people who have kept moving forward and the people we have lost their lives, but commemorating this time of when finally the truth just took over and crumbled a facade. And the facade was that America was in Vietnam for a good reason. Vietnam is its own country, and just like the 13 colonies felt they had a right to their own government, that was the force that was driving the reunification of Vietnam, communist or not. So we are at this cusp of a new era when the Vietnam story will be farther and farther behind us and perhaps more and more perspective, and we can see what we can learn from it. Because now, 50 years later, we're still dealing with living with a complex world, and truth and untruth are something we're having to grapple with, not so much philosophically, but we can see in our everyday life how information is difficult to manage. But that being said, we have each other, we have quiet study. You can't rush things. I've worked on this for 12 years, and I heard somebody talking about doing something quickly with AI, and I thought that might be possible to pull up some words, but you can't pull up the depth, you can't pull up the meaning, you can't pull up the connection that can come from quiet study and long thought and deep contemplation and opening your heart to connect with other people and with the truth, even though it hurts and sometimes makes you tear up. Thank you for joining me for this time. I really appreciate it. Revisiting this notebook from years and years ago and commemorating this day of the end of the Vietnam War, though it was not the end of the Vietnam story. I hope you'll take forward whatever seems to fit, and just keep your heart open to anyone who suffered, which is many people, whether it was themselves or their fathers or grandfathers, from something that happened in Vietnam. Because when we are open to it and look at it, ultimately the hardship can turn to learning and even to joy and embracing what is. Until next time, take care.